lives can be changed forever. Serve to change lives whenever we're working together. How do we do it anyhow? When to begin it now? Whom do we talk to? Anyone, everyone, everyone. So serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Serve to change lives whenever we're working together. Talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Whenever we're working together, talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives.
Good evening, Rotarians and guests. My name is Yidan Shi, and I am your MC for tonight's meeting of Rotary Melbourne. We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Banyurong people of the Kulin Nation, and also pay our respects to elders past, present, and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. Please note that most microphones have been muted for the duration of the presentation. Accolades, comments, and questions can be posted via the Zoom chat function throughout the presentation. Please ensure your glass is charged. And I now hand over to President Reg for the toast and this week's notices.
Thank you, Yidan. Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia, Rotary International. Okay, members, visitors and guests, it is my very great pleasure this evening to welcome you to our second meeting of the Rotary year and our first evening meeting this year. A warm welcome to our friend and guest speaker, or my friend and guest speaker, Tom Dawkins, who is currently, we're pleased to know, safe and sound at home in Sydney, waiting with us online. Welcome, Tom. It's great to have you here. The first slide, please. Our evening meetings this year will be led by a new team, Yidan, who we've just met as our MC, and George Giamadakis. Both have been briefed extensively by our outgoing chair, Renata Bernardi, who has given them great background on how this is done. George and Yidan will be using trainer wheels tonight as they get used to the experience, and Renata has kindly agreed to host one more time this evening. Thank you so much, Renata. We plan to have an evening meeting every second Wednesday of the month, and hopefully soon all our meetings will be in hybrid presentation form. The team would welcome suggestions of suitable guest speakers for our future program. So before I pass to the evening team, just a couple more club notices. Firstly, the Around the Bay annual fundraiser. A message to all Rotary members, especially new members, that our premier volunteer event for 2021 is taking place on the 3rd of October. That's a Sunday, It's called the Around the Bay Bike Ride. This is a great way to mix with your fellow members after the last year with limited in-person opportunities. We're seeking volunteers as bike riders, route marshals, support and gear vehicle drivers, and rest area attendants. Our aim is to raise money for scholarships for kids from disadvantaged families, to help them stay their course at school and reach their full potential. Our funds go to the Learning for Life program of the Smith family. Please note and make contact with Jim Orchard, Chris Wong, or Trevor Nink to join this fabulous fellowship opportunity on that day, with the knowledge of providing hands up to scores of deserving kids. The second note was just to say that and I'm really pleased to announce that the member directories for 21-22 have been posted to all members late last week. And I've been asked to give a special thanks to my wife, Sue Smith, for all of her efforts in ensuring as accurate a document as possible and in very good time. Now it's my pleasure to hand the meeting over to this evening's host, Renata Bernardi, who will introduce Tom, our guest speaker. Thank you, Renata.
Thank you, Reg. Hello, everyone. Tom is the co-founder and CEO of the crowdfunding platform StartSomeGood, an organization helping people design and launch social enterprises and impact projects. He is widely regarded as a thought leader in the social entrepreneurial space and is a popular speaker, mentor, coach, and advocate for social impact business. Tom is passionate about social technology, purposeful business, and harnessing those two ideas as tools to build a better world for everyone. He has helped create the Australian Changemakers Festival, Vibe Warrior Youth Inc., and the Black Rock City Farmers Market in Nevada, and was first social media director of Ashoka Innovations for the Public based in Washington. Tonight, Tom Dawkins will be speaking on making innovation for good happen. Please give our guest a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm sorry I can't join you in person. That was my original intention, but it was not to be. And so I'm coming to you from my socially distant home office. I want to acknowledge, though, that this home office is located on the traditional lands of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, as well as pay my respects to all the stories and traditions represented by all of you and the land that you're all standing on right now. This is a wonderfully diverse group just to look at, and I really think that whenever we talk about social innovation in Australia, that is really one of our great strengths and opportunities when it comes to social innovation, is being one of the most diverse countries on earth, because I think it's often through the meeting point of those different perspectives and life experiences that innovation emerges. And so I want to see if I can, so you don't have to just look at me for the next 30 minutes. I do have a few slides that I'm going to share as I go. Am I allowed to share my screen? I am. Fantastic. Let me get that on slide mode. That's a bit of an out-of-date photo. That's a pre-COVID photo for sure. But nonetheless, so yes, hello everyone. And what I want to talk about is making innovation happen. Some of the key trends that I think are driving social, like increasing both the need and driving the capability of people to create social innovation, including how they find those first funds, touching on some of what we've learned at running a crowdfunding platform for the last 10 years. And really what I want to do is just quickly bounce across some of what I think are the key trends, the key big picture trends that are really driving and I think impacting the social innovation agenda at the moment. And before I go any further, I realize I really do need to give myself a bit of a time to look at. Otherwise I am hopeless at sticking to agreed timelines. And those three trends I like to think of as speed, needs, and feeds. So first I want to talk about speed. And I really think if we're talking about how the world is changing today, one of the most profound ways in which it's changing is in fact the accelerating pace of change itself. Beyond any individual change, it's this overall acceleration that really has given rise to so many of the dynamics of our modern world. There are more of us, we're creating more data, we're more connected, and we're seeing more rapid technological disruption and impacts than at any time previously in human history. And so this gives rise, when we think about then social change and the work that Rotary was founded to do, and it's so incredible, by the way, that Rotary Melbourne has been going for 100 years. That is truly extraordinary. But as any group of people who are dedicated to doing good work and making a difference know, the conditions under which that difference is sought are changing, which require new approaches to bringing about the impacts and changes that we want. This is what I call the innovation imperative, that in a world that is evolving and changing as fast as ours, nothing that was proven to work yesterday can be assumed to work tomorrow. So we need to build a capability as a community of people who care about the future to generate new ideas, to test new ideas, to try new things out in order to discover those future solutions that we need. And this is proving to be actually quite a challenge to business as usual in the social good sector. Because who funds this social innovation? Innovation is expensive and risky. And so who should pay for it? And the fact of the matter is that by and large, and we are slowly getting better at this, but this was the problem and the cause that StartSomeGood was founded to respond to, is that we largely don't fund social innovation. That we don't have many organizations with the risk appetite and capability that are willing to take that experimental approach to social good. And so we have this gap for risk tolerant capital when it comes to social innovation. And this realization came to me not coincidentally when I was living in San Francisco in 2010. And I felt like I saw for the first time in my life what a genuinely pro-innovation ecosystem looks like. And there's multiple dimensions to that. But what it looks like, to be honest, is a lot of people trying stuff out. It looks like a lot of failure. I think sometimes people who haven't spent much time there particularly in the startup world that I float around in a bit, I kind of bounce back and forth and live in the gray zone between startups and community organizations and social good, and so on. And particularly in the startup world, there's of course a lot of kind of mythical thinking about Silicon Valley and the Bay Area is just a place where really smart people get together and do really clever things. And actually, it's the world's greatest concentration of bad ideas, is what it looks like in practice. Because that's what innovation looks like. Most things don't work. And the only way to truly differentiate what does and doesn't work is to try things and to learn from what then actually occurs in the real world. Now, in the commercial world, this experimentation is largely funded by a group of investors known as angel investors. And then only later do venture capitalists get involved. And those two groups are quite different because angel investors are by and large investing their own money. And that's crucial because it means they don't have to justify their decisions to anyone. Whereas venture capitalists are largely investing other people's money, which means they're going to have to be able to tell a really good, coherent, and logical sounding story to the people who've provided that money as to why they made the decisions that they made. And so there's simply less scope for them to invest based on curiosity, conviction, the desire to simply go on a journey and see what happens, the desire to learn. And it was only in kind of understanding a little bit about that commercial fund investment world that I began to kind of see the world that I had lived in for the previous 20 years, the kind of social impact funding world, through a different lens. And I realized that essentially every organization that is tasked with funding social change is essentially playing the role of the VCs for startups. But almost no one is playing the role of the angels. And so in social change, whether someone works for a foundation or they work on behalf of a high net worth individual, or those high net worth individuals are not normally out there having hundreds of coffees choosing their own organizations to put their money into. They have people who do that. Or if you work for the government, you're very aware that it's taxpayers' money, and people take that responsibility very seriously. And they want to do the most good they can do with the funds that they have. But they also want to be able to tell a very sensible story about the decisions they're making and to be able to justify that to the people who provide them with their resources and for whom their credibility and success is so paramount. And that's simply a dynamic that doesn't exist when you're investing your own money. And this wouldn't matter so much if the world didn't change so fast. Then we could rely on the slow process of things proving out. We could assume that things that were proven yesterday would likely work tomorrow. But that's not the world we live in. And it's particularly dangerous, I think, because there's a particular dynamic that I've become really familiar with over, decades now of working around social impact and social impact startups. And that is that good ideas look like good ideas, but great ideas are almost always disguised as bad ideas. And this is true commercially as well, that the really great startups almost always sound ridiculous to most people who hear them up front. Airbnb sounded absurd to 99% of people who heard the idea at first, that people would allow strangers to come and stay in their spare room or give them the keys to their spare house. Facebook sounded impossible that they would ever make money. There's no business model here, to almost everyone who heard it initially. And that's what innovation looks like, because what makes it a great idea is the same thing that makes it a bad idea on the surface, which is that it breaks the norm. It feels like it won't work because it violates some of our expectations or norms around how people behave. Our norm was that people didn't let strangers stay in their house. Our norm was people didn't interact using real names and real identities online. That the internet was a separate space that we inhabited as netizens, separate to our IRL existence. It was Facebook that broke that through their insistence on real names. These things didn't sound likely at first, and the fact that, and we're not wrong, most of this category of idea will in fact not work. It requires too big a change. It's too speculative. It's not, the world's not ready. Friendster failed, and then MySpace before Facebook, etc. But the only way to differentiate these great ideas from actually won't work ideas is to try things. And that's the innovation paradox. And so that role is played in the commercial startup world by angels and accelerators, but we simply have a gap, an endemic gap in the social good world for people willing to invest in things that may not work. And in some ways we're driving towards away from this more and more. And there's a real danger in some of the focus that is, you need both, of course. You need to be able to measure what's working and the great drive for impact measurement, while funding things for which no measurements yet exist in order that they can collect those measurements. The paradox of investability is that people always assume that you become investable first and then you're able to raise money, but it's almost always the other way around. You raise money and it's through the smart use of that money that you then become investable according to any rational metrics later on. It costs money to become investable because it costs money to actually even measure accurately and effectively what's going on. And so that's one. That's, I guess, the great need for innovation broadly. But individually, our needs are also changing, and our need to live lives of significance and purpose is evolving rapidly. And I think of this evolution as taking us from one focused on legacy to one focused on alignment. It's easy for us to forget here in the West, where the idea that change happens is so well understood, I think, and so kind of all around us, that this idea that things change is in fact uncommon in human history. Through most of human history, stuff didn't really change at least it didn't change on the pace of a generation. So throughout most of human history, and this is still the case in some parts of the world, but it was the case everywhere not very long ago. If you were, if I was born in a French village and my father was a blacksmith, I was 99% likely to spend my entire life in that village and become a blacksmith. And if you were a girl born in that village, you were 99%, you were probably 99.9% likely to spend your entire life within 10 miles of that village. And you were definitely not going to become a blacksmith or have those sorts of opportunities to learn a trade, and you were going to start a family and serve that family, etc. And that was how it was. And the idea that you would be like, what is my special purpose? What am I here to do? Made no sense throughout much of human history. This is not endemic to kind of what it is to be human. It's endemic to our culture and time. But a really interesting thing has happened, I think, and this is as the flip side of that acceleration of change, is that weirdly change has become demystified. In a world where change is rare and spectacular, then it doesn't feel like something that is easy for us to participate in ourselves. But in a world where change happens every day with everything all around us, the idea of change has become democratized, and the idea of change making. And so we've gone from a world where we barely believed that change happened at all to one where we understood that it was shaped by decisions, but most people thought that it was other people's decisions. It was, you know, inventors and prophets and conquerors and madmen and, you know, great people of history, their decisions matter, to now understanding it's a world where our decisions matter. And not just the big decisions, but the little decisions too. And this has led to this change in how we think about our role in making a difference. And so the old model is this idea of legacy, that people often reach a certain point in their life or career, and they decide that it's time to give back. And if this describes any of you, I don't want to make you feel bad. That's awesome to have reached a point where you decide it's time to give back. But younger people don't largely think that way around waiting for a particular time to give back. They want to figure out how to make a difference right now. So I think of this guy as being my number one kind of embodiment of the old model, the legacy model. Does anyone know who this is? Let's have a moment of audience participation. You can put it in the chat if you like, if you don't want to unmute. Actually, I should look at the chat. Now I'm telling you to do. Anyone? I mean, these kind of 19th century bearded white guys do all look alike. I mean, it looks like me, just a black and white photo, practically. It's weird. Didn't used to when I was giving this talk, but post-COVID, I now realize. That's Alfred Nobel. You would know him today as the guy whose name is on the Nobel Peace Prize, the world's greatest award for peacemakers. Does anyone know how Alfred Nobel made all his money that enabled him to endow the Nobel Peace Prize such that it carries his name today? Oh, Reg knows. Yeah, so you've been beaten by Rob.
He did a bit of explosive stuff, didn't he, Tom?
That's right. Essentially the inventor of dynamite. And then, you know, a little bit horrified by what happened, you know, unexpected externalities and all that. And he desperately didn't want his name simply to be associated with the carnage of modern warfare, and thought, what can I do about that? And so he endowed this award for peacemakers. And on the one hand, that's great, and that's completely normal and a nice thing to do. On the other hand, I can't help but feel a certain amount of cognitive dissonance that we take the world's greatest peacemakers and as their reward, give them a medal with the inventor of dynamite's face on it. It's so counterintuitive to, you know, what his life actually represents. But that's the legacy model in action. It's essentially not about how you made the money or what you did along the way. It's around what you left behind at the end. It's about that big philanthropic act at the end of life. Or more, you know, at a more common scale, it's about, you know, focusing on volunteer work once you retire, or getting more involved in community organizations at a latter stage in your career. And as I said, that's cool. And you definitely still, you know, that's a common thing. I'm on a couple of boards and I've had the classic conversation with everyone there. So, you know, why'd you decide to to join this board and get involved? And some of them are, you know, most of them, I'm the, you know, least accomplished person there. So they've had great careers and so on. And they say words to the effect of, you know, I felt like it was time. I'd achieved some my professional and personal goals, and I really wanted to give back. And very cool. But you will never hear someone under 30 or 40 speak like that as a rule, because that's the whole bad rap that the millennials and now the Zoomers and so on, and post millennials got, was they're so impatient. You know, how many you guys must have heard this in a context of people who have to deal with young staff saying, oh my God, they're so impatient. They want meaningful work. They want to be able to share their own ideas, like right from day one. They haven't earned the right. But thank goodness, because it's actually that lack of patience that might just save the world. Because if that generation was going to wait until they were 60 or 70 to give back, we would literally be out of time with so many of the important environmental and social issues that are going on right now. But instead of doing that, they're looking for something more like alignment, which is this, in some ways, which is both a more profound and a more humble idea. It's the idea of like, what are the decisions I have to make day by day? And how do I align those basic day-by-day decisions with my values and ethics? And so that's what leads people to wanting to focus on working for organizations that do good in the world, buying from from enterprises that have a more sustainable or ethical model, and putting pressure on their employees to step up and define a greater purpose. And it's fascinating the impact that this has had. When I was, when I was a baby nonprofit founder, starting out, raising money and so on in my early 20s, it was right when CSR, corporate social responsibility, was becoming the buzzword du jour, and a lot of corporates were setting up these CSR departments, and there was huge excitement about fantastic, at last, a way in. There's kind of a door you can walk through to engage in these corporations. But what tended to happen with those doors labeled CSR was they led into a room that had no other doors that connected with anywhere else in the corporation. That they're essentially a cul-de-sac with little influence and few resources often. And it's, what's happening now is that it's actually the kind of HR door that is in some ways becoming the key driver, or the HR function that in some ways is becoming one of the key drivers of the purpose conversation in many large organizations, because that's the pressure they're receiving from graduate staff, younger staff, particularly those with options who are in demand. And then the third key trend that is underpinning or I guess combining with this is not just a change in, I guess, how we think about our values, how we live our values, but also in how we communicate our values and share our stories. And I call that the shift from interruption to sharing. And so, when I went to university a while ago, I did a couple of marketing classes, and people used to say, the best marketing is word of mouth, but the problem is it doesn't scale. And so people would say, word of mouth is the best marketing, but people would behave like TV ads were definitely the best marketing. People's resources and effort went largely into interruption mediums. So an interruption medium is when you're doing something else, and then someone pays to interrupt you with their message. You're trying to watch the football and someone pays for an ad. You're trying to walk down the street and someone in a koala costume asks you for a donation. You're hoping to get the occasional piece of personal mail and instead you get junk mail. All of that's kind of interruption. Versus today, that still works. If you have a huge budget, great, but it's not the only game in town. And that's important because in a world where interruption was the key way in which messages and stories were exchanged, particularly commercial messages, was a world where the status quo was always entrenched because they had the resources to play that game. And startups and new ideas rarely do. But today, it's not just that person-to-person sharing is the best marketing. It's also that which scales the best. But now, thanks to social networks and media, we have incredible scale with the human-to-human interactions. And this has selected for a different type of communication, not just that which has the biggest budget behind it, but the content which is the most shareable. The best marketing today is not the marketing you do yourself at all. It's the marketing you inspire your audience or your community to do for you. And so you can mock this up in a bunch of different ways, but I think of in terms of content that shares, it needs to be timely, memorable, and trustworthy. And so social enterprises and social impact messages have an inherent advantage in this world. In some ways, like they're the mammals post the asteroid strike, just better adapted fundamentally. The reptiles are still the lumbering dinosaurs. Is the business as usual dinosaurs that are lumbering around. But purpose is the asteroid that is striking the economy that is changing the game. And social technologies is part of what's fueling that wave because it's selecting for a very different type of message, and it's promoting and helping share a very different type of message, which is helping new ideas compete, and it's helping impact ideas compete in that marketplace for attention. And that's a big part of what's driving this social enterprise business for good movement, which we're a proud participant in. And I think one of the places you really see this is in social media with the most boring products possible. You look at things like toilet paper or water, and I've got ahead of myself. But these are things that people who purchase from mainstream brands never choose to share on their Instagram, but people who purchase from impact brands do. Why is that? Because the act of sharing literally shares more content. If you share a packet of Kleenex toilet paper, I mean, who cares? What are you sharing? You're sharing the used toilet paper. That's probably an overshare, to be honest. I mean, but we all do. It's not that interesting in the first place. Whereas when you share who gives a crap toilet paper, you're saying to people, I'm an ethical consumer. I'm someone who cares about people other than myself. I'm someone who cares about world development and poverty, etc. So it's literally got more content. It's more designed to spread in the modern world. And so these last two trends are part of how we're addressing the challenge I posed in the first trend around the pace of change and the need for innovation. is thanks to that desire by so many people to live a life of alignment, we're seeing the rise of purpose business founded by entrepreneurs who want to, who want to do well from a business point of view, but also want to do well for the world at the same time. Not one and then the other. Not I'm going to make lots of money and then give it back, but actually the only pathway I'm willing to walk towards personal wealth and success is a pathway that does good along the way, not just at the destination. Plus, our ability to share messages, build community, inspire each other in new ways are helping in some ways begin to fill some of this impact capital gap for social impact ideas through things like crowdfunding. And this is what led me to crowdfunding in the first place, was having spent 15 years founding organizations, doing a bunch of pretty innovative stuff, opening the first co-working space in Australia, running, we would now call virtual summits in like 2002, sending 18-year-olds out on the campaign trail, traveling around with the Prime Minister and opposition leader as a youth media project during the federal election, and just being in the trenches of trying to convince people to fund this stuff over and over again. It's hard, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be hard in some respects. Like you have a credibility gap to overcome when you are yourself an inexperienced founder or entrepreneur doing something that no one else has done before and for which there's no direct evidence it's going to work. Naturally, there's a credibility gap to overcome. But it's a much lesser credibility gap that needs to be overcome when you're asking people to chip in at a level that is individually accessible to them. It's a lot easier to take a punt on an inspiring new idea that may or may not work, but is worth a try with $20 or $100 than it is with $200,000 or $1 million. And so crowdfunding creates that. So part of how crowdfunding creates that more risk tolerant capital is simply by breaking or sharing that risk amongst the much larger audience. And so this is a pathway we're seeing more and more great social impact ideas walk, from new movements like the Me Too movement in Australia, through to Indigenous run media organizations, the Great Food Justice Truck launched by the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre there in Melbourne. Lots of great social enterprises that are leveraging both their business model and their purpose, their impact model to raise funds and to pre-sale new products, like Sister Works, also in Melbourne. Breakthrough technologies like Ability Maid's child orthotics and 3D scanning tool. But all of them have realized something that's really important and often misunderstood about crowdfunding, which is it's not about crowds at all. The people who fail at crowdfunding are almost always tricked in a way and into this idea that there's a crowd out there. And it's an idea that's kind of embedded in the name, which is why we really tried not to use it. For about the first 3 years of our life, we insisted on calling ourselves a peer funding platform, not a crowdfunding platform. That ultimately proved to be a mistake. It was terrible for search engine optimization if you refuse to use the same language that everyone else in the world is using to describe the thing that you do. So we had to bite the bullet eventually and accept that crowdfunding is what this thing is called. But it's really important that you understand that while that's what it's called, that's not really what it's about. It's about communities, and it's about building a community around your idea that's willing to take that, I mean, it may or may not be even a risky idea, but if it is a risky idea, that are willing to take that leap with you, to try it out, to see what works and to learn along the way. And when it works, this very powerful thing happens, which is people feel like they were part of making it work, not just a passive investor, but part of a community that came together to make it possible. And this is one of my favorite emails I've ever received in the 10 years of running StartSomeGood, which is from one of the supporters of an organization called the Rhythm Hut in Gosford, north of Sydney, which is a community organization, got expelled from their space, needed to find a new space, was able to rally the resources in an incredibly rapid time to get it done. And this person wrote to us because she was so moved by the experience of being a supporter, not even one of the leaders of the organization, and said, "We used to wait for government to do things for us, but now we realize we can do it for ourselves. Your initiative is transformative. Our community came together in a way that raised their sense of ownership to a new level." That's so incredibly powerful. And so when crowdfunding works, it creates financial capital, but it creates social capital at the same time. And the social capital often outlasts, and is more powerful and important than the financial capital. That is often what people are focused on when they launch a crowdfunding campaign. They do so because they need money. But they often tell me afterwards, the money's gone. But what we've realized is this community has stuck with us and is now helping us get where we need to go. So I'm just going to leave you with, and this is, I guess, a little bit of a tease, but a small piece of practical advice for anyone who's thinking of crowdfunding or doing this kind of public fundraising is our formula for what it takes. 5 key things you need to get right to be able to essentially share an idea with people in a way that they're willing to believe and willing to get involved with. And the first is, of course, clarity. The opposite of inspiration is confusion. It's not opposition, it's confusion. It's like not getting it at all. You can't be excited about something you don't understand. You won't invest in something you won't understand. Hell, how did I just go backwards? You don't understand. So, and if you're a social enterprise, of course, you need that double clarity on your impact model, but also clarity on your value proposition. If you're offering a product or service that has an impact model embedded into it, that doesn't mean it doesn't also need to deliver direct value to the actual purchaser of that product and service. So you need clarity on both levels. But you also need credibility. A lot of people get stuck thinking it's just about clarity, that if I could tell this story in the right way, if I could share enough information, you will get it, you'll want to support it. But often the gap's around credibility. Like, I get it, I think it's a cool idea, I'm just not sure if you're the right person to make this idea happen. And so it's really important to signal credibility through your own, through your own demeanor and story, but also often through the support that you bring in, through the partners or team or endorsements that you have from people with more credibility than you. Usually, if you're if you're starting our Rotary, lots of credibility as an organization, but a lot of the people we see are launching something brand new. So that thing has no credibility because it's brand new, and they themselves often have limited credibility because they're young or they're trying something for the first time. And so often the key thing there is to get the right endorsement and partners from people who have the credibility you need. And so some of that will rub off on you. It's also important to make the right promises. A lot of people choose things like keep what you raise crowdfunding, which sounds like a benefit to the fundraiser, but is often a trap because it reduces the credibility when you essentially tell people you're keeping their money whether or not you can deliver or not. Whereas all or nothing crowdfunding, the version we use, has much more credibility because it's a promise that you won't take their funds if you haven't got sufficient funds to do the thing you promised. And so it feels riskier for the fundraiser, but reduces the sense of risk for the donor, which is the more important dynamic. The third one is communities. And really what we mean by that is carefully chosen communities. There's a common mistake purpose-driven fundraisers make, which is wanting to tell everyone their story. They're very passionate about their story, they're very passionate about their cause, and they want the world to know. And that's a great ambition to have, but it's not a good marketing or outreach strategy during your crowdfunding campaign. You have limited time and limited bandwidth, and you need to know how to focus your limited time and bandwidth on the people who are most likely to support. So doing the thinking work up front to design your target market, we go through like a persona development process with the people that we coach and work closely with to make sure that we're really laser focused on very specific people. And it's not just about specific people, it's the right story to the right person. That if I'm launching a social enterprise food truck, employing homeless people and serving North African cuisine, I have at least 4 powerful stories to tell about how cool is our food trucks, how great are social enterprises, how important is providing employment to homeless people, and how delicious is North African food. The mistake a lot of people make is they think that I need to therefore, my target market is therefore people who love food trucks, are passionate about North African food, love social enterprises, and care about homeless people. But I don't need them to have all 4. I need them to have any one of the 4. But each of those is a different message and therefore a different outreach strategy. And that then leads to the 4th C, which is specific channels to reach specific audiences. The channel, you'd tell a different story in the We Love Food Trucks Facebook group versus the Jobs for Homeless People Facebook group. It's the same project. You're not kidding anyone. You're just highlighting the key element for that particular community, that particular channel. And finally, courage. Got to get out there and be willing to do the work, willing to share what matters to you and invite people to be part of that with you. So I got to wrap up. My final just thought is that it's not just about what we've learned. While we started off as an alternative to institutional funds, we've actually discovered that they go quite well together. So we do something called Crowd Match that powers many programs, such as ING's Dream Starter program, and means that they put up some funds and the community is then inspired and invited to invest alongside. And so, for instance, the last Dream Starter program turned 100,000 into almost 290,000. We did something similar. Got to speed up. With the English Family Foundation, they turned 120,000 into 375,000. So we found that one type of capital can inspire another. So the exciting news is that for anyone who does have an innovative idea for change, there is now a pathway where there really wasn't one before. And so there's no longer a need to wait for that big yes, that if you have a great idea to share with the world, you can get on with that right now and we can help make it happen. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was a sensational presentation. Certainly lots to think about. As Reg has said, everyone, if you've got questions, please pop them in the chat. But if you don't mind, Tom, I've got a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about vision, and my background's large corporate Australia, I guess. And a lot of the things that you talked about resonated with me, the clarity around vision and it being something that connects your team and your customers with. Do you get a sense that corporate Australia is moving in that direction, or do you think that it's still going to come from the younger cohort and those smart entrepreneurial startups?
I think they are moving, definitely. I mean, we're seeing more and more interest. I was actually even just earlier today, I'm also one of the founding directors of SECNA, the Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales and the ACT, which is one of, over the last couple of years, every state and territory has got a local peak body for social enterprise practitioners. CENVIC is the Victorian version. And we had a partnership co-design session today with some kind of impact leaders from about a dozen different companies that are interested in engaging. And I think you see that more and more. I think that large businesses are very interested in figuring out how they can engage with the social enterprise sector. When it comes to innovation, though, I really think there's some sort of law of human organizations that it is just harder for big organizations to innovate. Actually, I mean, I know there's various models that you can put in place, but one of the most successful models is the hothouse model, which is essentially that you build something that is like a startup, try and isolate them from the rest of the business so they can, in other words, the best way to do it is to pretend you're not part of a big company. So I think I have very limited experience in big companies myself, to be honest, maybe for this reason, but that's where I think that the key approach that I believe in is not that you have to be innovative, but you have to learn how to engage and leverage innovation. And so that could look like things you see companies and big foundations, same dynamic, I think, even doing things like innovation challenges that invite entrepreneurs and startups in to try and solve their problems in return for funding and strategic alliance and things like that. And I think I would love to see more nonprofits do that. I mean, in the corporate sector, you see a lot of obviously merger and acquisition, merger or purchasing, big companies buy small companies. It's how innovation happens a lot of the time. People think of a company like Google as super innovative, but they've really had like no successful innovations since, I don't know, like Google Maps. And some people say they stole that, but mostly they've bought, they bought Android, they bought Waze, they bought YouTube,
Yeah.
And so we kind of lack that mechanism in the not-for-profit sector. Is one of the kind of challenges just on a structuring. There is no such, you can't acquire a small, it has to be a completely mutual thing. And so it's always brave, I think, when people do that merge, but I would like to see more of that.
Yeah, sure. Renata's got a couple of questions. One here, Tom, what do you think of matching funds to speed growth of funding? So crowdfunding matched by either government or other large organisations.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant model. Like I was saying, we run entire programs essentially around that model, but you can also do it, one by one. Anyone can kind of create that for themselves. In some ways, that's where we've set it up front, and we have a match partner, and then we're looking for the right projects or the right organizations for that opportunity. But as an individual organization, you can get that match partner as well. The way we implement that is a little bit different. I think people often think of, I think even the way you said it just then, that you raise funds from crowdfunding and then someone matches it. What's kind of cool about the way doing it though is you can kind of run it in both ways. So when we, for instance, use ING's funds in Dreamstarter, they put in the funds first. So if they're putting in 25,000 conditional on the project raising another 25,000, it's matched. What people often then do is they set themselves up with a $25,000 fundraiser and they're working from 0 to 25. But that's not the reality of where you're at. And of course, down there in the copy, you're like, we have a match partner. And when we get to 25, it's really 50, but that's leaving it, that's a lot of explaining. How we would always set that up is that you have 25 and there's obviously, but it's a $50,000 fundraiser and you have a remaining gap to go. This is how big dollar fundraising always happens. Like when they're raising $100 million for a new hospital, they never announce the fundraiser on 0. They get the first 50 million or 70 million or 80 million or 90 million, and then they announce a public fundraiser to fill the gap, because otherwise it just feels too far often. So we've seen that work incredibly reliably. When people can bring kind of that first half, almost everyone who makes it halfway succeeds as a rule, because the first half is harder to raise than the second half.
Yeah.
And so one of the cool things about crowdfunding is our version of crowdfunding, what we call all or nothing crowdfunding, is that in some ways you build that match dynamically. You don't have to bring, if you can bring a match, fantastic. But even if you don't, let's say you need to raise $50,000, well, you know, hopefully you make it halfway. On an all or nothing campaign, that is essentially now a match. You've got a $25,000 worth of commitment hanging there, but it's conditional on it being matched, or else you won't receive it, according to that all or nothing model. And therefore, almost everyone who gets halfway, like 98% of the time, will make it the rest of the way, because the second half is a lot easier. So if you can start from halfway, you're in a really amazing place to reach your goals.
Yeah, sure. Renault's got another question. Says, asking, what's your opinion on the fact that even in Australia, some urban and especially regional and remote communities are not able to access the technology we all take for granted? And then she says, I know social entrepreneurs in ag tech that moved out of Australia because their innovations couldn't work here.
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem. I think it's kind of heartbreaking that so much investment and so much kerfuffle, and we've ended up with such an inadequate network now, let alone future-proof for the future. I mean, I know it's a lot better here than in rural areas, but, you know, I'm still getting my internet through copper wires, even though it's the NBN in terms of to the house. So, you know, we're even now when it's just been implemented, we haven't caught up, let alone kind of future-proofed, as they say, for like the next. So I think that's a disaster. I'm not quite, you know, I'm not quite sure what to suggest we do about it, other than to keep putting pressure, I guess, on. I think that really is a nation-building project that does require government. You know, in a country as spread out, it's not going to be. This is one of those examples, I think, of where you can't necessarily business model your way to every outcome you want. You know, I'm a big believer in social enterprises. I think there are lots of opportunities to create aligned business models and impact models, but in a country as big as Australia, there will need to be government investment in providing that access to internet to everyone.
Yeah. Chris Soteropoulos has asked, for the youngest short-term gratification expectation, is their appetite better satisfied by local projects versus international projects?
It's an interesting question. I feel like there's a lot in there that we could unpack in terms of. I think the appetite for either. I think in some ways the appetite. So when we coach people around fundraising, we're looking for what we call hooks, which is that specific story that is going to appeal to a specific audience, that have a high care factor around a particular element of that. And it's a matter of looking for, I think, for those key points of connection. I think in today's world, a lot of people, not everyone, but within certain niches, within certain cultures and communities, there's a lot more global connection, and people think of themselves as participating in a global culture or subculture, much more than they did before, and therefore maybe more inclined to support international projects within that area of interest. Like, I'm more inclined to support international. So I'm very passionate about social enterprise, very involved in the social enterprise community here. That's a very global sector and outlook, and I think people within that community, of course, love to see social enterprises launch here, but are also highly receptive to exciting and innovative and inspiring models overseas within that particular area of interest. I think the challenge in general for fundraising, but the opportunity today, is to try and really, really tightly focus on the people with the highest propensity to connect with your story. And I think that is where people do. And I think where people often let themselves short is not quite knowing how to think through their target market, or how to plan to reach that target market, and therefore finding themselves in the mode of kind of throwing stuff in the wall, feeling like they're kind of throwing stuff at the wall from a kind of storytelling outreach point of view, or they're just badgering their personal following relentlessly. You know, you've got 300 friends on Facebook, you've got 800 followers on Twitter, and you're literally just smashing those 1,100 people over the head with your story relentlessly for 30 days, and feeling frustrated that you're not getting the response you want, and they're feeling frustrated that and it's because it's that lack of ability to often, or that experience in thinking through to kind of what are the communities that are out there that I want to reach, and how can I reach them? Yeah. Now, it used to be we lived in a world with too few channels. 100 years ago, it was pretty hard to get your story out there if you weren't a newspaper baron, or friends with one, or had money to pay, or what have you. Whereas today, it's the opposite problem. There's so many channels, but it's a much better problem to have. Overwhelmed by opportunity to share your story, you simply need to, I guess, take the time to think through carefully and really come up with a coherent, clear clarity. It's all about clarity, really. Having that real clarity on who is it for, who's going to care about this story, and really focus. Crowdfunding really is a preaching to the choir. It's not, you know, your personal mission, the goal even of your company or project may be to convert people to a new way of thinking, but that's almost certainly not going to be the role of the crowdfunding campaign. And we see this all the time. We've seen, you know, people raise money to do a series of bus shelter ads to promote veganism. Who do we think paid for those ads? It was vegans, of course. It's not the target market, you know, it's not people who are like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for, someone to run an ad so that then I would see the ad and finally become a vegan. People don't pay people to change their minds. People pay people to change other people's minds. So you're always right. So from a fundraising point of view, you're almost always trying to convene the choir. And it's one of our real principles or catchphrases that StartSomeGood is that crowdfunding is about convening and not converting. That you don't have the time, and it's highly inefficient to try and convince people to care about something they don't. And that's where that short attention span comes in. It takes real, you know, when we fundraise, people often think about the second conversion where someone decides to give money, but there's this really important conversion before that, which is where someone decides to give attention. And that's actually in many ways often the harder conversion. And that's where the short attention span comes in. People have to have a high level of certainty that they are going to care about what's at the other side of that link in order to even click it. But that's where being clear on your different messages and your different hooks comes in. That I don't spend the whole time, if I'm promoting my social enterprise food truck that creates jobs for homeless people, I don't spend the whole time saying, it's really important we create jobs for homeless people. You know, this is you know, you can judge a society by how they treat their most disadvantaged. It's outrageous how many, you know, that there's so many homeless people in Sydney. I'm convinced that what homeless people need is not a handout, it's a hand up through a job opportunity. I should say that. That's a really important one of my stories, to be clear. I'm not disparaging, but that's a specific story for a specific group. I should also be sure to leverage the how cool a food trucks story. I think food trucks are awesome. I used to live in San Francisco. There were lots of food trucks. I used to love sampling new food trucks. I've always thought Sydney should have more food trucks. I'm finally doing something about that. I'm launching a food truck. Do you love food trucks? Are you with me? And then I should also do I think social enterprises are a really powerful way to make change in the world. That's why I'm establishing a social enterprise with a blended model that will both give people employment opportunities, but also serve delicious food to hungry consumers in Sydney. Those, I'm talking about the same thing, but they're three different, what we call hooks. I'm highlighting a different element. And each of those highlights, each of those hooks should be targeted at a different target market consciously in a focused way. And that's how you succeed at any type of online community building, is you have to just deal with the fact people don't have enough attention span to give you a minute to find out if they want to know more. They'll give you 2 seconds. But if you can give the right story in the right context quickly, they'll then come through and read your whole story, give you 10 minutes, and then 10% of them will also give you money.
Yeah.
Or whatever the percentage will be.
Thanks, Tom. Chris Stillwell, you've got a question you might want to pose.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for talking with us tonight. It's been absolutely fascinating. The question is Rotary. You know, if you take Rotary Melbourne, at any one time on an annual program, we've got, you know, no less than 60 community projects happening over the course of a year. And from an expenditure point of view, you know, we'd be investing anywhere from 150 to 300,000 again over a calendar year, and it's done in what I'd call very traditional Rotary ways, from a fundraising mechanism that I've been a Rotarian on and off for 35 years and hasn't changed in 35 years. What you're talking to us tonight, how relevant that? Clearly, that story is relevant to the Rotary of the future. So maybe talk a bit about that, and how do we as an organisation make the transition from traditionally where we have been to what the future may look like?
I mean, first of all, I don't think everyone needs to leap on every trend or technology, if you know what I mean. It's a matter of, are things working? And if, you know, if I'm not sure how you raise those funds, but if that's through galas and dinners and events that are very in person and so on, but that's what really works for your community, what people love, that's great, that's fine. You know, I would, you know, keep doing that for sure. But I think in terms of building the skill set, you're in a great position to actually do very well with crowdfunding because you have a very strong, credible brand for the organization overall. Now, not for, I mean, no brand is strong for every single person and so on. But, and you obviously have a core group of people who are very passionate. Now, each of you, where crowdfunding I think can be especially impactful, it's a great way to take a small, like, not small necessarily, but a core of people who have high passion, but then empower them to share in a very efficient way. That crowdfunding is really tied into those social technologies, that social sharing that I was talking about earlier, and therefore is a great way of amplifying through the personal networks and so on of the people involved. It's also a great way, as I was saying at the very end there, and sorry if that felt a bit rushed, but of not just kind of raising from zero on every project, but of taking an amount of money and then leveraging it to raise more. That you could take, that on average, we've done this probably 20 times through different programs that each time worked with 3 to 8 projects with some sort of match arrangement in place. And over that, about 100 different projects or so on that we've done this with, the average match, or what we call leverage factor, is 2.85. So when they start with some chunk of money from some sort of supporter, we've done a real blend of some from companies, foundations, local government. They normally triple it then through the online sharing. And I think that's because, for most crowdfunding campaigns, we really, when we're coaching people who are new to fundraising, we really bang on about what we call the day one donors, as being the most crucial funds into any campaign, because that's the people, it doesn't matter how inspiring your idea is. A crowdfunding campaign with 0 supporters is super uninspiring, and people are highly unlikely to spend much time with it in order to find out how great the actual idea is if it's on 0, because it's a really strong human heuristic to want to go where other people have already gone. And, it's kind of like, if you see 2 restaurants and one's full of people and the other's empty, you really have a very strong desire to go to the one that's full of people, just on the premise that if the other one was good, there would surely be people there. And that's kind of how it is with crowdfunding campaign. We want them to be popping the moment we see them, because it's highly reassuring that we're like, there's something going on here. It's real. There's a community behind it, etc. And so what's powerful about that kind of match model, or being able to bring some funds to put on a new campaign up front, is that it overcomes that kind of day one donor model, that the moment someone sees it, it's already got some amount of funds and commitment in place, which makes it a lot easier for the next person, then the next person, and the next person to get involved as well. But the fact that you're doing so many individual projects, I think, is another opportunity, because crowdfunding is very much about projects, not organizations. Organizations don't raise core funds or ongoing funds generally through crowdfunding, at least not of the type that I've been talking about. It's very much about specific projects. Now, sometimes the specific project is I'm launching an organization or I'm saving an organization. We've certainly had some successful campaigns that were like, we've just had all our government funding removed, and this is literally our just keep us alive for 9 months while we figure out what we're doing. But that's a project. That's the keep us alive for 9 months project. So crowdfunding is very much always about a specific piece of work funded with these specific funds that is going to happen within some relatively immediate time frame. And it sounds like you have lots of those to potentially think about what
because we're right up against time. Really appreciate all the insights that you've provided and the questions for everybody. But if I can hand back to you, Dan, for a vote of thanks for your presentation, which I'm sure everyone's enjoyed. And there's a whole host of other questions there which we haven't been able to get to. So I apologise for that, but great presentation, and thank you very much, Tom.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for to our guest speaker, Tom Dawkins, tonight for the presentation. Very informative and also very inspiring. There is a gift from Rotary Melbourne being posted to you in the following days, which is a pair of limited edition R100 centenary socks, 200% Australian made, in Preston by past President Phil Andersby's company, Widener's Wear. And now, in closing the meeting, I would like to thank Renata once again for her role in chairing of tonight's meeting, and wish her well in the future. Please stay in touch, Renata. Thank you to President Reg, our production team, especially Jo, because she has been helping a lot, and also to my co-chair, George, for tonight's presentation. A reminder that next week, our regular weekly lunch meeting will be at number 35 Sofitel with guest speaker Edward Tudor, Executive Director of Melbourne Indigenous Transition School, who will speak about how MITS pivots in COVID. Also a reminder that our monthly evening meetings will continue every second Wednesday for the month, with the August meeting scheduled for the 11th. Please diarize the date and join us. Goodbye, everyone. Stay safe. And now we close the meeting recognizing NAIDOC Week 2021 with a song from two Australian legends, Paul Kelly and Guramu.